I stood on that stage with a projector remote in my shaking hand, watching my husband's face drain of color as his secret bank statements flashed across the screen behind me. Our entire family, our friends, his co-workers, everyone we knew sat frozen in their chairs at our anniversary party, staring at proof of 12 years of lies. This was the moment I burned our life to the ground, and I'd do it again without hesitation. Let me take you back to where this nightmare really began, to a Tuesday morning that seemed like any other. I was 23 years old, fresh out of college, working my first real job as a marketing assistant when I met David Chan at a coffee shop near my office. He was 28, charming, with warm brown eyes that crinkled when he smiled, and he spilled his latte all over my presentation notes. He apologized profusely, bought me a new coffee, helped me reprint everything at the shop next door, and asked for my number before I left. Within 6 months we were engaged, and by the time I turned 24, I was walking down the aisle in a simple white dress, believing I'd found my forever. Life felt perfect in that naive, beautiful way that only your early 20s can feel perfect. 3 months after our wedding, David came home from his construction job and told me he'd been in an accident at the worksite. A beam had fallen, he said, crushing his lower spine and leaving him paralyzed from the waist down. I remember the hospital room, the sterile smell, the doctor's grave face as he explained that David would need a wheelchair for the rest of his life. I held his hand through every tear, every moment of despair, every rehabilitation session that went nowhere. We were young, we were in love, and I genuinely believed that our bond was strong enough to weather anything. I told him we'd figure it out together, that his disability didn't change how I felt about him, that I'd be there every single day. And I was there for 12 long years. I gave up my marketing career because David needed round-the-clock care those first few years. I learned how to help him transfer from bed to wheelchair, how to manage his medications, how to adapt our tiny apartment for wheelchair accessibility. We moved into a ground-floor unit, installed ramps and grab bars, rearranged our entire lives around his supposed disability. I took a job as a remote customer service representative so I could work from home and be available whenever he needed me. The pay was terrible compared to what I could have earned in marketing, but it didn't matter because taking care of David was my priority. I watched my college friends climb corporate ladders, buy houses, take vacations, while I measured my days in medication schedules and wheelchair maintenance. Money was always tight, unbearably tight. David received disability payments from his accident, but they barely covered our basic expenses. I stretched every dollar, clipped coupons, bought generic everything, turned down every invitation that cost money. I learned to cut his hair at home, to repair our clothes instead of replacing them, to make meals that could stretch across multiple days. My parents offered to help financially, but I was too proud to accept. I'd made a vow to David, for better or worse, and I was determined to prove I could handle worse. My friends slowly drifted away because I could never join them for dinners out, never take weekend trips, never do anything that required spending money we didn't have. My world shrank down to our apartment, my computer screen, and David's needs. Every morning I'd wake up at 6 to help David get ready for his day. I'd assist him into the bathroom, help him shower using the special chair we'd installed, help him dress, make breakfast while he positioned himself at his computer where he did freelance graphic design work. Then I'd start my own work shift, fielding angry customer complaints for 8 hours while making sure David had lunch, had his afternoon medications, had everything he needed. Evenings were more of the same routine in reverse. Dinner, his physical therapy exercises that never seemed to improve anything, helping him prepare for bed, then collapsing into sleep myself only to do it all again the next day. Weekends offered no break because his care didn't stop just because it was Saturday. This was my life every day for 12 years. I won't pretend I was a saint about it. There were nights I cried in the shower, overwhelmed by the exhaustion and the isolation and the suffocating sameness of it all. There were moments I resented him, resented the accident, resented the universe for putting us in this situation. But I always came back to love, always reminded myself that he didn't choose this, that he was suffering too, that we were partners facing an impossible situation together. David seemed to handle his disability with remarkable grace after those first few years. He built up his freelance business, taking on graphic design projects that brought in some additional income. He was always on his computer, sometimes late into the night, and I assumed he was working to help ease our financial burden. I loved him for that dedication, for trying so hard despite everything. We celebrated small victories and endured the daily struggles. Our sex life adapted to his limitations. Our social life was mostly video calls with friends who'd stuck around. Our dreams downsized from big adventures to maybe one day affording a slightly nicer apartment. I convinced myself I was content, that this was just what love looked like when life threw you a curveball. About 8 years into our marriage, I noticed David seemed happier, lighter somehow. He smiled more, seemed less frustrated with his limitations, spent even more time on his computer. I figured his business must be doing well, or maybe he'd just reached some kind of acceptance with his situation. I was happy he was happy, grateful that he'd found some peace. Around that same time, I started noticing little financial discrepancies. Nothing major at first, just small amounts that didn't quite add up when I balanced our checking account. $20 here, $50 there, always with vague descriptions like miscellaneous or supplies. I asked David about it once or twice, and he said it was for business expenses, things for his clients, completely reasonable explanations that I accepted without question. But the discrepancies continued, slowly growing larger over the months. I'd see charges for $100, then $200, always when I wasn't paying close attention. Our account would be lower than I expected, but never quite empty enough to cause a real crisis. I felt uneasy about it but pushed the feeling down, telling myself I was being paranoid, that David deserved my trust after everything we'd been through together. One Thursday afternoon, about 11 years into our marriage, I finished work early and decided to surprise David by cooking his favorite meal for dinner. I walked into our living room and found him intensely focused on his computer screen, headphones on, completely unaware of my presence. I was about to call out to him when something made me stop and look closer at what was on his screen. It was a video chat but not a work call. I could see a woman on his screen, young and pretty, laughing at something he'd said. They were talking intimately, the way people do when they know each other well, when there's history and inside jokes. My stomach dropped as I watched my husband flirt with this stranger, watched him smile at her in a way he hadn't smiled at me in years. I backed out of the room silently, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might be sick. I went to our bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process what I'd just seen. Maybe it was innocent, I told myself. Maybe she was just a client, maybe they were just friendly. But deep in my gut I knew better, and that knowing felt like swallowing glass. That night at dinner, I watched David carefully, looking for signs of guilt or nervousness. He seemed completely normal, chatting about his day, eating the special meal I'd made, thanking me for taking such good care of him. His performance was flawless, and that's when I realized he'd been performing for a very long time, possibly our entire marriage. I didn't confront him that night, or the next day, or the day after that. Instead, I started paying attention in ways I never had before. I noticed how protective he was of his phone and computer, how he always angled screens away from me, how he'd close windows quickly if I walked by. I noticed he took calls in the other room more frequently, always saying it was work clients who needed privacy. I started checking our bank account daily instead of weekly, really scrutinizing every transaction. The pattern became clearer once I was looking for it. Regular charges to restaurants I'd never been to, gas stations in neighborhoods across town, online purchases shipped to addresses I didn't recognize. When I added it all up over the months, we were talking about thousands of dollars. Money we desperately needed. Money I'd been killing myself to save, disappearing into David's secret life. 3 months of surveillance passed before I made my next move. I waited until David was in the shower. Then I grabbed his phone from the nightstand where he'd left it charging. My hands shook as I entered his passcode, which thankfully he'd never changed from our wedding date. What I found in his messages made my blood run cold and my vision blur with rage. Messages to someone named Jessica. Hundreds of them going back years. Pet names, plans to meet up, explicit photos, conversations about their relationship and their future together. He called her baby, said he loved her, promised her things he'd never promised me. There were messages about hotels they'd stayed at, dinners they'd shared, trips they'd taken together while I thought he was at design conferences. I took screenshots of everything, my fingers moving on autopilot while my brain screamed. I sent them to my own email, deleted the sent messages from his phone, and put it back exactly where I'd found it before he got out of the shower. Then I went to the kitchen and made breakfast like it was any other day, smiling at my husband while bile rose in my throat. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part came 2 weeks later when I decided to follow the money trail more carefully. I logged into our joint bank account and really dug into the statements, tracing back months and years of charges. That's when I discovered the transfers, regular monthly transfers of $500 to $1,000 going to an account I didn't recognize. I called the bank, pretending to be confused about the account number, and the representative helpfully told me it was being transferred to a Chase account under David's name. Secret account. My husband had a secret bank account that he'd been funneling money into for years while I ate ramen for lunch and wore shoes with holes in them. It took me 3 more days of careful planning before I had what I needed. I created a fake profile on social media, added some random photos and information, and sent Jessica a friend request. She accepted within hours because her account was public and she accepted everyone. I scrolled through her posts, my stomach churning with every image. There were photos of her at nice restaurants, wearing expensive clothes, showing off jewelry and handbags that cost more than my monthly rent. There were check-ins at hotels and resorts, pictures of beach vacations and city trips. And there, buried in her tagged photos from 8 months ago, was the image that shattered my entire world. David standing next to Jessica at some outdoor festival. His arm around her waist, both of them smiling at the camera. David standing. Not sitting in a wheelchair, not struggling with mobility, not disabled in any visible way. Just standing there like any other able-bodied person, like the last 12 years of my life had been nothing but an elaborate performance. I stared at that photo for 20 minutes straight, my brain refusing to process what my eyes were clearly seeing. Then I scrolled frantically through more of Jessica's photos, finding others. David standing in her kitchen. David walking on a beach. David dancing with her at what looked like a wedding. All of these photos were from the past few years, time-stamped and geotagged, undeniable proof that my husband could walk. Have you ever had a moment where your entire reality fractures and reforms into something completely different? Where everything you thought you knew suddenly becomes a lie and you have to rebuild your understanding of your own life in real time? That's what those photos did to me, and I physically couldn't breathe for several minutes while the truth crushed my chest. He'd been faking it. For 12 years, David had been faking his disability, putting on an elaborate show every single day while I sacrificed everything to take care of him. Every morning I'd helped him dress. He could have dressed himself. Every meal I'd prepared and served to him. He was perfectly capable of making himself. Every transfer from bed to chair, every adaptation to our lives, every limitation we'd lived with, it was all fake. And the reason for this unbelievable deception, was sitting right there in Jessica's Instagram feed. He'd faked a disability so he could collect disability payments while working under the table, could manipulate me into being his caretaker and maid while he lived a secret double life with his mistress, could steal from our joint account to fund lavish dates and gifts for another woman. I sat on the bathroom floor with my laptop, rocking back and forth, trying not to scream. The betrayal was so massive, so complete, that I couldn't find the edges of it. It wasn't just infidelity, though that alone would have been devastating. It wasn't just financial abuse, though he'd stolen years of my earning potential and thousands of dollars. It was the disability fraud, the manipulation, the way he'd made me feel guilty for every moment of resentment I'd felt, every time I'd been tired or frustrated. For 12 years I'd believed I was doing the right thing, being a good wife, honoring my vows. I'd judged myself harshly for every negative thought, every flash of resentment, every moment I'd wanted to escape. And the whole time, I'd been the victim of a con so cruel and calculated that I couldn't fully comprehend it. I thought about confronting him immediately, screaming in his face, throwing him out of our apartment. But something stopped me, some instinct that told me a private confrontation wouldn't be enough. He'd gaslight me, I realized. He'd lie, deny, manipulate, try to make me doubt what I'd seen. He'd had 12 years of practice lying to my face every single day, and he was clearly very good at it. No, I needed proof that couldn't be denied, and I needed witnesses. I needed to expose him so completely and publicly that he couldn't talk his way out of it, couldn't manipulate me or anyone else into doubting the truth. I needed revenge that matched the scale of his betrayal, and I needed it to hurt him the way he'd hurt me. Our 12th wedding anniversary was 6 weeks away. We talked about maybe having a small party. Nothing fancy since we couldn't afford it, just some close friends and family at the community center near our apartment. David had seemed enthusiastic about it, probably because it was another chance to play the devoted disabled husband role for an audience. I told him I wanted to make our anniversary special, that 12 years deserved a real celebration. I suggested we invite more people, make it a bigger event, really mark the occasion. David agreed immediately, thrilled that I was taking the initiative to plan something nice. He had no idea he was agreeing to his own public execution. I spent the next 6 weeks preparing my revenge with the same meticulous care I'd spent preparing his daily care routine. I contacted the insurance company that had been paying his disability benefits and filed an anonymous tip with evidence of fraud. I hired a private investigator to document David's activities for 2 weeks, getting video footage of him walking, running, lifting heavy objects, living a completely normal physical life whenever he left our apartment. I gathered bank statements showing the transfers to his secret account, printed out screenshots of his messages with Jessica, compiled photos from her social media showing them together. I organized everything into a detailed presentation, complete with timestamps and annotations. This wasn't going to be an emotional accusation that he could dismiss. This was going to be an airtight case. I sent formal invitations to our anniversary party, making sure Jessica received one at her address that I'd found in David's phone. I invited his parents, his siblings, my parents, my siblings, our friends, his co-workers from his old construction job, anyone who'd witnessed his supposed disability over the years. I told everyone I was planning a special tribute to David, a celebration of his strength in overcoming adversity. I rented a proper venue instead of the community center, a nice hotel event space with a projector and sound system. I told David I'd gotten a great deal on it, and he believed me because he had no reason not to. I planned a menu, hired a photographer, sent out a schedule of events. To everyone else, it looked like a woman planning a beautiful anniversary celebration for her husband. During those 6 weeks, I had to continue living with David, continue the charade, continue helping him in and out of his wheelchair while knowing the truth. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. Harder even than the 12 years before, because now I was acting too. Every kind word was poisoned, every touch made my skin crawl, every moment together was a lie on top of his lie. But I held it together because I had a goal, and that goal kept me focused. I'd wake up each morning, help my perfectly able-bodied husband pretend to be disabled, go through our routine, and then spend my free moments perfecting my revenge. I practiced my speech, timed my presentation, made sure every detail was perfect. The night before the party, I barely slept. I lay next to David in our bed, listening to him breathe, thinking about 12 years of sleeping next to a stranger. I thought about the life I could have had if I hadn't met him, the career I'd given up, the experiences I'd missed, the version of myself I'd lost to his manipulation. I thought about every sacrifice, every struggle, every moment of guilt and exhaustion, and I fed all of that pain into my resolve. The morning of the party, I helped David get ready like always. I helped him shower, helped him dress in the nice suit I'd bought for the occasion, styled his hair, made sure he looked perfect. He was excited, nervous in that sweet way people get before big events, thanking me for planning everything, telling me how much he loved me. I smiled and kissed his cheek and felt absolutely nothing. We arrived at the venue early to set up. I'd told David I needed his help directing the decorators and caterers, keeping him busy while I made my final preparations. I loaded my presentation onto the venue's computer system, tested the projector, made sure everything was ready. I'd hired someone to record the entire event, telling them I wanted professional documentation of our special day. Guests started arriving at 6, and I played the perfect hostess. I greeted everyone warmly, introduced people who hadn't met before, made sure drinks were flowing and appetizers were circulating. I watched Jessica arrive alone, looking beautiful in a designer dress that I knew my money had bought, and I smiled at her like she was any other guest. David didn't seem fazed by her presence, which told me he'd probably invited her himself, confident in his ability to manage the situation. By 7 o'clock everyone was there, about 80 people total, all dressed nicely and chatting happily, completely unaware of what was about to happen. The photographer was capturing candid moments, the videographer was recording everything, and I was mentally running through my speech one final time. At 7:30, I clinked my glass to get everyone's attention. The room quieted down and people gathered around, expecting a sweet anniversary toast. David wheeled himself to the front of the room to join me, reaching for my hand with that loving smile he'd perfected over 12 years. I let him take my hand, felt his fingers intertwine with mine one last time, and began to speak. I started soft and sentimental, talking about how we'd met 12 years ago, how quickly we'd fallen in love, how young and naive I'd been. People smiled and nodded. A few women dabbed at their eyes, completely swept up in the romance of it all. I talked about our wedding, about those first few happy months, about believing we'd found our forever. Then I shifted tone, talking about the accident, about the day David told me he'd been paralyzed. I described the hospital visits, the initial devastation, the adjustment period. People's expressions shifted to sympathy, many nodding because they remembered those early days. David squeezed my hand, probably thinking I was building to some message about overcoming adversity together. I talked about the sacrifices, and here I got specific. I detailed giving up my career, taking a low-paying job to care for him, the financial struggles, the social isolation, the physical and emotional exhaustion. I watched discomfort creep into people's faces as my speech got less celebratory and more raw. David's hand tensed in mine, and I could feel him starting to worry about where this was going. Then I turned to look at him directly, pulled my hand out of his, and said the words I'd been rehearsing for 6 weeks. Everything I just described was based on a lie. David was never disabled. He's been faking it for 12 years to commit fraud and fund his double life with his mistress. The room erupted into shocked gasps and confused murmurs. David's face went white, then red, and he started to speak, to protest, to deny. But I'd already pulled out the remote for the projector, and the first image flashed onto the screen behind us. It was one of the photos from Jessica's Instagram, showing David standing upright, clearly able-bodied, smiling at the camera. I clicked through more photos methodically, each one showing David in various states of normal mobility. Walking, running, dancing, carrying heavy objects. I'd organized them chronologically, showing that this wasn't a recent recovery but a sustained deception spanning years. The room was dead silent except for the click of my remote and the occasional gasp from the audience. David tried to speak several times, but I talked over him, narrating each photo with cold precision. This one was taken 14 months ago at a concert. This one was taken 9 months ago at a restaurant. This one was taken 6 months ago on a beach vacation. I watched his credibility crumble with each click, watched people's expressions shift from confusion to horror to disgust. Then I pulled up the bank statements, projected them large enough for everyone to see the transfers to David's secret account. I highlighted the amounts and dates, adding them up to a total that made several people in the audience physically recoil. Over $60,000 over the years, stolen from our joint account while I worked myself to exhaustion and lived in poverty. Next came the messages between David and Jessica, and here I was selective, showing only the most damning exchanges. The ones where he called her his real love, where he complained about having to maintain his Disability Act, where he laughed about how easy it was to manipulate me. I watched my parents' faces as they read their daughter being mocked by the man they'd welcomed into our family. Jessica tried to leave at this point, pushing toward the exit, but several guests blocked her path, demanding she stay and face what she'd been part of. I'd expected this and didn't discourage it. She stood against the wall, crying, while I continued my presentation, showing photos of her wearing expensive jewelry and carrying designer bags, all purchased with money David had stolen from me. I pulled up the private investigator's video footage next. And this was the most damaging evidence of all. 2 minutes of crystal-clear video showing David's daily routine on days I was at work. The footage showed him getting out of his wheelchair the moment I left, walking normally around our apartment, going for runs in the park, meeting Jessica at hotels, living a completely normal physical life. The gasps turned to angry shouts as people watched the video. Someone yelled that this was fraud. Someone else called David a monster. Several people were crying. David's mother was sobbing openly. Whether from betrayal or shame I couldn't tell and didn't care. My mother looked like she wanted to physically attack him, held back only by my father's hand on her arm. I let the chaos build for a moment before clicking to my final slide, a simple list of consequences. I'd already reported the disability fraud to the insurance company and they were pursuing criminal charges. I'd filed for divorce and frozen all our joint accounts. I'd contacted his employer to report the under-the-table income. I'd given copies of all evidence to my lawyer, to the insurance investigators, and to several media outlets who'd expressed interest in covering such an unusual fraud case. Then I looked at David, really looked at him, and delivered my closing statement. For 12 years, you watched me sacrifice everything for you. You watched me give up my dreams, my money, my time, my youth, all to take care of a disability that never existed. You let me feel guilty for every moment of frustration, every flash of resentment, every time I was tired or overwhelmed. You manipulated my love and turned it into a prison. My voice didn't shake, didn't waver, because I'd moved past anger into something colder and more resolute. You stole my 20s and half my 30s. You stole money we desperately needed to fund your affair. You stole my trust, my dignity, my sense of reality. You made me doubt myself every day while you played pretend and laughed at how gullible I was. I watched tears stream down his face, watched him try to form words that wouldn't come, and I felt nothing but satisfaction. So now I'm taking something from you. Your reputation, your freedom, your ability to ever manipulate anyone like this again. Everyone here knows what you are now. Everyone you work with will know. Everyone in the disability community you've insulted with this fraud will know. And hopefully you'll spend time in prison thinking about what you've done. The room exploded into activity after that. David's father lunged at him, held back by other guests. Jessica was surrounded by angry women demanding answers. My siblings rushed to me, hugging me, crying, asking if I was okay. The photographer and videographer captured everything, the complete destruction of David's carefully constructed lies playing out in real time. David tried to approach me, wheelchair abandoned now since there was no point in maintaining the act. He reached for me saying my name, trying to explain or apologize or something. I stepped back and looked at him with all the contempt I felt. Don't touch me. Don't speak to me. The only communication between us from now on will be through lawyers. The party dissolved into chaos after that, but a satisfying chaos, a righteous chaos. People were furious on my behalf, supportive, offering help and resources. Several of David's former co-workers from the construction company were talking about reporting him to authorities themselves, angry that he'd stolen disability benefits that could have gone to people who actually needed them. I stayed for about an hour, accepting support and answering questions, watching David's complete social destruction with a sense of grim satisfaction. He sat in a corner, no longer even pretending to need the wheelchair. His parents and siblings confronting him about the magnitude of his deception. Jessica had fled at some point, but not before several people recorded her presence and involvement for documentation. The video of the event went viral within days, shared across social media with headlines like, "Woman exposes husband's 12-year disability fraud at anniversary party," and "Epic revenge. Wife's public takedown of cheating, fraudulent husband." News outlets picked it up, running stories about disability fraud and long-term deception. I gave a few interviews, carefully managed by my lawyer, telling my story to raise awareness about financial abuse and manipulation in relationships. The legal consequences came swiftly. David was arrested 3 days after the party and charged with insurance fraud, disability fraud, and multiple counts of theft. The district attorney was aggressive in prosecuting because disability fraud cases are taken very seriously, especially ones this extensive and calculated. David's facing up to 15 years in prison and restitution of over $200,000 when you factor in the fraudulent disability payments. The divorce is proceeding smoothly since no one, not even his own lawyer, can defend his actions. I'm getting everything. Our apartment, our savings, his retirement accounts, everything. The judge was particularly harsh during the preliminary hearings, disgusted by what David had done. I'll also likely receive restitution from the criminal case, though I'm not holding my breath on seeing much of that money. Jessica lost her job when her employer saw the viral videos and realized she'd been complicit in fraud. Apparently, she'd known about David's fake disability from the beginning, which made her involvement even worse in the court of public opinion. She's facing her own legal troubles, and last I heard, she'd moved back in with her parents in another state, trying to escape the internet infamy. The aftermath has been surreal in a lot of ways. My story resonated with people globally, with thousands of messages from strangers sharing their own experiences with manipulation and betrayal. I've connected with other victims of financial abuse, and we're working on starting a support group for people recovering from long-term deceptive relationships. My career is slowly rebuilding. A marketing agency reached out after seeing my interviews, impressed by how I'd managed the whole revenge reveal, and offered me a position. It's entry-level because I've been out of the field for so long, but it's a start, and they're paying me more than I made in customer service. I'm 36, starting over, relearning who I am outside of being David's caretaker. The emotional recovery is harder than the practical stuff. I'm in therapy twice a week, working through 12 years of gaslighting and manipulation, learning to trust my own perceptions again. Some days I'm angry, furiously angry at the time I lost and the life I could have had. Other days I'm just sad, grieving the person I was before I met David, the innocent 23-year-old who thought love conquered all. My relationships with friends and family are healing too. People apologized for not seeing the signs, for not questioning more, for letting me struggle alone. But how could they have known? David's performance was flawless, and I'd believed it completely. We were all fooled by someone who turned out to be a sociopath, willing to sustain an elaborate deception for over a decade to serve his own selfish needs. I think about those 12 years a lot, about what I could have done differently. Should I have been more suspicious earlier? Should I have caught the financial discrepancies sooner? Should I have demanded more transparency? But victim blaming myself doesn't help, and my therapist reminds me constantly that none of this was my fault. I was a trusting partner who believed her husband, and he weaponized that trust against me. The public nature of my revenge has been both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, it ensured David faced real consequences and couldn't manipulate his way out of accountability. On the other hand, I'm now forever linked to this story online, the woman who exposed her husband's disability fraud at their anniversary party. Potential employers Google me, dates recognize me, strangers approach me in public to share their opinions. But I don't regret it, not for a second. A private confrontation would have ended with him gaslighting me, making me doubt what I'd seen, possibly even convincing me to stay and work things out. He'd have had time to hide evidence, to craft a believable story, to manipulate the narrative. By going public, I took away his power to control the truth, and that was worth every uncomfortable consequence. I've learned that betrayal isn't just about the initial lie. It's about every moment that followed where the person could have told the truth and chose not to. David didn't just lie once about being disabled. He lied thousands of times over 12 years. Every morning he let me help him dress, every meal he let me serve him, every sympathetic look he gave me when I was exhausted from caring for him. Those were all individual acts of betrayal compounding into something massive. The disability community has had mixed reactions to my story. Some have supported me and condemned David for making genuine disability seem questionable and giving ammunition to people who doubt legitimate disabled individuals. Others have criticized my public revenge, saying it feeds into harmful narratives about disability fraud being common when it's actually extremely rare. I understand both perspectives and have tried to be clear in interviews that David's actions don't represent disabled people at all. The money is another complicated piece. Even if David pays full restitution, which is unlikely given his probable prison sentence, no amount of money compensates for 12 years of my life. My 20s and early 30s, the years I should have been building a career, traveling, making mistakes and learning from them, dating and figuring out who I was, all of that is just gone. I can't buy those years back, can't reclaim the experiences I missed or the person I might have become. I've started dating again cautiously, though it's hard to trust anyone after what David did. How do you believe someone's words when you spent 12 years believing elaborate lies? How do you trust your own judgment when it failed you so spectacularly before? I'm working on it in therapy, trying to understand that David's manipulation doesn't mean everyone is manipulative, but it's a slow process. Sometimes I still wake up and instinctively start planning David's care routine before I remember it was all fake. 12 years of conditioning doesn't disappear overnight, and my brain still has those neural pathways worn deep from repetition. I'll think about medication schedules or wheelchair maintenance before catching myself, and the reminder of his betrayal hits fresh all over again. My parents keep asking if I'm okay, and I don't know how to explain that I'm both better than I've been in years and also completely shattered. I'm free from David's manipulation, starting to rebuild my life, seeing a future that isn't dictated by someone else's fake needs. But I'm also grieving deeply, not for David but for myself, for the innocent person who walked down the aisle at 24 thinking she'd found her partner. The story keeps evolving as more details emerge. Investigators discovered David had been planning to eventually recover from his disability once he'd maxed out his insurance benefits and disability payments. He'd been researching miracle recoveries and experimental treatments, preparing a narrative for how he'd miraculously regained mobility after years of paralysis. He literally had a whole new lie planned to cover up his old lie. They also found evidence that I wasn't his first victim. Before me, David had apparently run smaller cons, nothing as elaborate as the disability fraud but similar patterns of financial manipulation and deception. One ex-girlfriend came forward saying he'd convinced her to support him through a fake business venture that never existed. He's a serial manipulator, and I just happened to be his most successful long-term con. Knowing that should make me feel better, like it wasn't personal, but it actually makes it worse. I wasn't special enough to inspire his devotion, but I was gullible enough to be useful. He didn't love me and then betray me. He never loved me at all. I was just a mark, a resource to be exploited, and every tender moment we shared was part of his performance. I keep a folder on my computer with all the evidence I compiled, all the screenshots and bank statements and photos. Sometimes I look through it when I'm doubting myself or my decision to expose him so publicly. The evidence reminds me that I wasn't crazy, wasn't overreacting, wasn't cruel. I was responding proportionally to an enormous betrayal with evidence-based consequences. The viral fame is fading now, which is a relief. For a while, my face was everywhere, and people had strong opinions about my revenge tactics. Some called me a hero, others said I was vindictive and went too far. But the internet moves on quickly, and now there are new stories capturing everyone's attention, and I can return to some version of normal life. I've been thinking a lot about the nature of revenge and whether mine was justified. Some people argue that two wrongs don't make a right, that I should have handled it privately through lawyers and let the legal system do its work. But those people didn't live my life for 12 years, didn't sacrifice everything for someone who was laughing at them behind their back. The public humiliation was the point, not just an unfortunate side effect. David had humiliated me privately for over a decade, making me feel weak and dependent while he lived freely. He'd humiliated me financially, stealing money while I struggled. He'd humiliated me sexually, making me believe our limited intimacy was about his disability when really he was getting everything he wanted from Jessica. Returning that humiliation publicly felt like restoring some kind of cosmic balance. Would I do it differently if I could go back? I don't think so. Maybe I would have acted sooner if I'd caught the signs earlier, but the public exposure was necessary. It ensured accountability in a way that private confrontation never could have. It warned other potential victims about who David really was. It gave me back some power in a situation where I'd been completely powerless. People ask if I'm worried about him getting out of prison eventually and coming after me. Honestly, no. David's a coward who maintained his con by preying on my compassion and trust. Now that everyone knows what he is, now that there's a legal record of his fraud and abuse, he has no power over me. And I'm not the same naive 24-year-old he married. I'm someone who learned the hard way that trust needs to be earned. My new job is going well, better than I expected after being out of marketing for so long. My boss knows my story and has been incredibly supportive, giving me opportunities to prove myself and rebuild my professional confidence. I'm working on campaigns, using my creativity again, remembering what it felt like to have a career instead of just a survival job. I went on a real vacation last month, my first in 12 years. Just a week at a beach resort, nothing extravagant, but it felt like absolute luxury. I swam in the ocean, read books for pleasure, slept late, ate at restaurants without calculating every penny. I cried on the second day because I'd forgotten what it felt like to just exist without the weight of someone else's fabricated needs crushing me. The divorce will be final in 2 months. I'll legally shed David's last name and reclaim my maiden name. Another small piece of taking back my identity. I've already started using it professionally, and every time someone calls me by my real name, I feel a little more like myself. The woman who married David Chen is gone, replaced by someone harder but also stronger. I still have nightmares sometimes where I'm back in our apartment, trapped in the routine, and David's laughing at me while I help him into his wheelchair. I wake up panicked before I remember it's over. He's in prison, I'm free. My therapist says the nightmares will fade with time, that my brain is processing the trauma, but they're still disturbing when they happen. The support from strangers has been overwhelming in the best way. I've received thousands of messages from people sharing their own stories of betrayal, manipulation, and abuse. Many have thanked me for showing them it's possible to leave, to expose the truth, to reclaim your life even after years of deception. If my story helped even one person recognize they were being manipulated and gave them courage to leave, then maybe all the public scrutiny was worth it. I've been asked to speak at a conference about financial abuse in relationships next month. It's terrifying but also important. So many people don't recognize financial abuse when it's happening to them because it's subtle, insidious, wrapped up in seemingly legitimate reasons. If I can help people spot the red flags earlier than I did, if I can save someone from losing 12 years to a con artist, then this nightmare will have served some purpose. My relationship with my family has deepened through this experience. They've seen me at my absolute lowest, supported me through the exposure and aftermath, never once made me feel stupid for being deceived. My mom told me she's proud of how I handled everything, and that meant more than any viral video or news article. Her opinion actually matters, unlike the thousands of internet strangers who had thoughts about my choices. I'm slowly rebuilding my social life too, reconnecting with old friends who drifted away during the David years. Most of them understood why I disappeared into caregiving and are happy to have me back. We're making new memories, going to concerts and dinners and all the things I missed for so long. I'm relearning how to be a friend instead of just a caretaker. Dating is still complicated though. How do you explain this story to someone new? Do you bring it up on a first date, warn them you have trust issues and a viral revenge video? Do you wait until they Google you and find it themselves? I've tried both approaches, and neither feels natural. Most guys are either intimidated by my story or uncomfortably fascinated by it, neither of which leads to healthy relationship potential. But I'm in no rush. I'm 36, starting my life over, and I have time. Time to heal, time to figure out who I am outside of David's manipulation, time to build the career and life I should have had all along. Maybe I'll meet someone eventually who sees my strength instead of my damage, who appreciates my hard-won wisdom instead of being scared by it. The financial recovery is happening slowly. Between the divorce settlement, restitution payments when they eventually start, and my new salary, I'm finally building real savings. I opened a retirement account for the first time last month, and seeing money going into my own future instead of David's secret account felt incredibly satisfying. Every dollar I save is proof that I'm taking back control. I bought myself a gift last week, something small but meaningful. A necklace I'd seen years ago but never bought because we couldn't afford it. It cost $200, which once would have been unthinkable, but now represents me valuing myself enough to spend money on something purely because I wanted it. I wear it every day as a reminder that my needs matter, that I matter. The shame has been the hardest emotion to work through. Even though intellectually I know I was a victim of elaborate fraud, part of me still feels stupid for not seeing through it sooner. How did I miss the signs? How did I not question more? Why did I trust so completely? My therapist reminds me that David was a skilled manipulator and that blaming myself is just another form of his abuse, but shame doesn't respond well to logic. I've had to block a lot of people on social media, trolls who seem to think my story is entertainment or who blame me for being gullible. The internet can be cruel, and anonymity brings out the worst in some people. But I've also connected with amazing people, built a community of survivors who understand what it's like to have your reality completely rewritten by someone else's lies. David's family reached out a few months ago to apologize. His mother, father, and sister all sent separate messages expressing their horror at what he'd done and their support for me. His mother particularly seemed devastated, saying she didn't recognize her son in the person who could do something so cruel. I appreciated their messages but haven't responded, needing space from anything connected to David. The trial is scheduled for next spring. I'll have to testify, to stand in a courtroom and recount 12 years of manipulation for a jury. My lawyer says it'll be difficult but that my testimony is crucial for securing a conviction. I'm preparing myself mentally, practicing staying calm and factual rather than emotional, knowing that my composure will be more convincing than my rage. I wonder sometimes if David feels any remorse or if he's just angry he got caught. The few reports I've heard from people who've interacted with him suggest he's still deflecting, still trying to minimize what he did, still playing the victim. He apparently tells people I overreacted, that the disability fraud wasn't that serious, that I destroyed his life over a misunderstanding. The manipulation continues even from jail. But his manipulation doesn't work anymore. Not on me and not on anyone who saw the evidence. The video footage alone is irrefutable, and trying to explain away video of himself walking and running as somehow a misunderstanding just makes him look more delusional. The jury will see what I saw, and they'll understand the scope of his deception. I keep thinking about what I'd say to my 24-year-old self if I could go back in time. Would I warn her not to marry David? Would I tell her to run the first time something felt off? Or would I tell her that she's going to go through something horrible but come out stronger on the other side? That the nightmare has an end even if she can't see it yet? Maybe I'd just tell her to trust herself more, to not dismiss her own doubts and instincts in favor of someone else's lies. To remember that love shouldn't require you to sacrifice everything, to shrink yourself down to nothing, to accept a life of struggle while someone else laughs at your devotion. To know that she deserves better than what she's settling for. The woman I am now wouldn't have fallen for David's con. I can spot manipulation a mile away, can recognize financial red flags, can trust my gut when something feels wrong. But I had to lose 12 years to become this person, and I'll never know who I might have been if I'd learned those lessons differently. That loss haunts me more than the money or the betrayal, the loss of the person I never got to become. I'm trying to forgive myself for that, trying to accept that we all make mistakes and mine just happened to be catastrophic and public. My therapist says self-compassion is crucial for healing, but it's hard to be compassionate toward the naive girl who believed every lie, who worked herself to exhaustion for a man who saw her as nothing but a resource to exploit. But she deserves compassion, that younger version of me. She was trying her best with the information she had. She loved genuinely and believed in her vows and wanted to be a good partner. She didn't deserve what David did to her, and punishing her now by refusing to forgive her perceived failures doesn't change the past. It just keeps me trapped in David's abuse, letting him steal my present and future along with my past. So I'm working on it, on forgiving her and integrating her into who I am now. She's part of my story, not something to be ashamed of but something to learn from. Her trust became my skepticism, her naivety became my wisdom, her suffering became my strength. I wouldn't wish the experience on anyone, But I also can't deny that it changed me in ways both terrible and transformative. The anniversary of David's arrest passed last month. 1 year since everything exploded, since I stood on that stage and burned my life down to rebuild it from ashes. I marked it quietly, just me and my therapist, talking about how far I've come and how far I still have to go. Progress isn't linear, and some days are harder than others, but the trajectory is upward even when it doesn't feel like it. I've started writing everything down, not just for therapy but because maybe someday I'll want to publish my full story. Not the viral video version or the news article summaries, but the complete truth of what those 12 years were really like, how the manipulation worked day by day, how I found the strength to expose it and rebuild afterward. If my story can help others, if it can shine light on these kinds of abusive patterns, then maybe all the pain will have served a greater purpose. People tell me I'm brave for exposing David so publicly, for standing up in front of everyone we knew and revealing the truth. But I don't feel brave, I feel like I did what was necessary for survival. Keeping it private would have meant carrying the weight of his lies alone, protecting his reputation while I crumbled under the truth. Exposing him publicly meant sharing that weight with others, letting the truth protect me for once instead of serving his interests. My parents asked recently if I'd ever trust anyone again, if I'd ever risk marriage or commitment after what David did. Honestly, I don't know. The thought of being that vulnerable again terrifies me, of believing someone enough to build a life together, only to discover years later it was all performance. But I also know that David doesn't represent all men or all relationships, that his cruelty was specific to him, not indicative of love itself. Maybe someday I'll meet someone who earns my trust gradually, who proves through consistent actions that they're trustworthy, who understands my scars and doesn't demand I pretend they don't exist. Maybe I'll find a relationship built on actual partnership instead of exploitation, where both people give and receive support instead of one person pretending to need everything while secretly taking everything. Seems possible in theory, even if it feels impossible right now. For now, I'm focusing on myself, on rebuilding the life David stole and creating something new from the rubble. I'm pursuing career goals I'd abandoned, trying hobbies I'd given up, traveling to places I'd only dreamed of. I'm learning what I actually like and want instead of what I tolerated for someone else's benefit. I'm becoming a full person again instead of an extension of someone else's needs. The best revenge, they say, is living well. And while the public exposure was satisfying, I think the real revenge is this. I'm happy. Not every day, not consistently, not without struggle and setbacks, but genuinely, increasingly happy in ways I never was during those 12 years. I'm building a life I actually want to live, and David's in prison facing consequences while I'm out here thriving despite what he did to me. That's the part he didn't count on when he built his con. He thought he could use me up and discard me when convenient, move on to the next victim without consequences. He thought I'd be too broken or too compliant to fight back. He underestimated my capacity for rage and my willingness to ensure he faced justice. And now he's paying for that miscalculation while I'm reclaiming everything he tried to take from me. So was it worth it, the public revenge? The viral video and the media attention and the internet commentary? Absolutely. Every uncomfortable moment of public scrutiny was worth it to ensure David couldn't manipulate his way out of accountability, to warn others about who he really was, to take back some power in a situation where I'd been powerless for so long. I'd do it again without hesitation, and I'd encourage anyone in a similar situation to prioritize their own truth and safety over protecting their abuser's reputation. The only regret I have is not seeing through his lies sooner, not trusting my instincts when things didn't add up, not questioning more aggressively. But even that regret is tempered by understanding that I was young and trusting and wanted to believe in my marriage, that none of it was my fault, that David's manipulation was sophisticated and sustained. I did the best I could with what I knew, and when I learned the truth, I acted decisively to protect myself and ensure justice. Here's what I want other people to take from my story. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, investigate. Financial things don't add up, demand transparency. If your partner is secretive about their phone or computer or activities, that's a red flag worth examining. And if you discover betrayal, don't let anyone make you feel bad for exposing it. You don't owe your abuser privacy or protection. You owe yourself truth and justice. Would I have believed all of this a year ago, standing on that stage with trembling hands and a presentation full of evidence? Probably not. I was still so raw then, so consumed by anger and hurt, unable to see past the immediate devastation. But time and therapy and slowly rebuilding my life have given me perspective, and I can see now that the exposure was the beginning of my healing, not an obstacle to it. David took 12 years from me, but he doesn't get any more. Every day I live freely, every goal I accomplish, every moment of genuine happiness is me taking back what he stole. The rest of his life will be marked by the consequences of his choices, while mine will be marked by my resilience in overcoming them. That's not just revenge, that's justice, and it's deeply, profoundly satisfying. So to anyone reading this who might be in a similar situation, who suspects their partner is lying or manipulating or abusing them financially or emotionally, investigate, document, trust yourself, and when you're ready, expose the truth in whatever way protects you and ensures accountability. You deserve better than what you're settling for, and your abuser deserves consequences. Don't let fear or shame or misplaced loyalty keep you trapped in someone else's lies. And to those who judge me for how publicly I exposed David, who think I went too far or was vindictive or cruel, you didn't live my life. You didn't sacrifice 12 years to a con artist. You didn't feel the specific betrayal of helping someone who didn't need help while they laughed at your devotion. Until you've lived through that kind of sustained, calculated abuse, you don't get to judge how I responded to it. My revenge was proportional to his betrayal, and I make no apologies for prioritizing my justice over his comfort. I'm 36 years old, starting over, rebuilding from nothing. Some days that feels overwhelming, like I'm impossibly behind where I should be in life. But other days it feels liberating, like I get a second chance to create the life I actually want instead of the one someone else forced me into. I'm choosing to focus on the liberation rather than the loss, on what's possible rather than what's gone, on who I'm becoming rather than who I was. The story doesn't have a neat, tidy ending because life doesn't work that way. David's trial is still pending, my healing is still ongoing, my future is still unwritten. But the chapter where he controlled my life is definitively over, ended by my choice to expose the truth and demand justice. Whatever comes next, it's mine to write, and that's more than I could have said a year ago. So here's my final thought, the thing I'd want anyone reading this to understand. You're stronger than you think. You can survive betrayals that seem unsurvivable. You can rebuild from devastation. You can take back your power from someone who stole it. And sometimes, the most healing thing you can do is make sure your abuser faces consequences that match their actions. That's not cruelty, that's justice, and you deserve it. Have you ever trusted someone so completely that discovering their betrayal felt like your entire reality was a lie? How did you rebuild your sense of what was real and who you could trust? And if you found yourself in my situation, would you have chosen public exposure or private resolution, and why? I still wonder sometimes if there was a better way to handle it, even though I believe in what I did, and I'd genuinely like to hear how others think they'd have navigated something this devastating.